Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like it's like engineering, right? You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Right, and it's comforting.
Yeah.
Because it's binary. I mean, the damage is visible, it's categorized, and the path to fixing it is just, it's standardized.
Exactly. But then, you step into the world of neurodevelopment or psychology and severe trauma, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just, well, it's broken.
Totally broken, yeah.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, honestly, it's murky. You can't just point to a bone.
Yeah.
You are trying to track these, like, invisible fractures in a person's entire sense of reality.
Which is, I mean, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. And the stakes of navigating those waters, they're just incredibly high.
They really are, which is exactly where we are going today. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking directly at how you, and well, all of us, how we process trauma. Specifically, we're zeroing in on one of the most, I think, profound questions in human psychology. Like, why do some people who endure profound systemic abuse go on to repeat that cycle, while others actively build these incredibly complex systems to break it?
Right, that divergence point. It's something sociologists and, psychologists have debated for decades, like what makes one person mimic their abuser while another person becomes deeply, almost fiercely protective.
Exactly. And to explore that, we are looking at some incredibly unique sources today. We've actually been given access to excerpts from a deeply personal database, some historical chat logs, and a comprehensive analytical framework that the author calls Hyper-Sanity.
Yeah, the Hyper-Sanity framework.
Right. And our mission today is to explore a core concept within these texts. The author calls it the ethical non-transmission of domination.
Which is quite a title.
I know. It sounds like a massive academic mouthful, but we are going to break down the precise mechanics of how someone's total powerlessness can actually be transformed into a tool for protecting agency, rather than destroying it.
And I think let's set the tone for this right away, because this isn't just some abstract philosophical exercise or like a coping journal.
Right.
We are looking at a tangible architectural blueprint. I mean, it is a system for maintaining your grip on objective reality when external forces are actively trying to override it.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's about survival, yes, but it's a highly structured, almost engineered form of survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how this Hyper-Sanity framework was built, we really have to start at the foundational relationship in this author's life. We have to look at their relationship with their mother.
Oh, absolutely. The crucible for the entire philosophy, really.
That's right, because when you read through these database logs, the mother isn't presented as this, like, purely protective, perfect guardian.
Not at all.
She was a massive contradiction. Like, on one hand, she provided the author's only sustained source of love and humanity in what was a deeply abusive home.
Right. She offered a partial confirmation that the author's reality was, in fact, real.
Exactly. But on the other hand, she was being controlled herself. She was often weakened, financially trapped, and crucially, she failed to publicly defend the author from the severe abuse happening, like, right in front of her.
And what's fascinating here is how the author processes that exact contradiction. Because they don't do what a lot of people might do. They don't completely reject the mother's love and say, you didn't save me, therefore your affection is entirely fake.
Right, they don't just throw the whole relationship away.
Exactly. They recognize that her emotional love was genuine, but they realized it was ethically insufficient. Like, it didn't actually do the job of keeping a child safe.
It sounds like private love without public defense is like being thrown a life jacket that doesn't actually float.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like, it looks like rescue. You feel like someone is trying to save you, but when the water gets high, it doesn't actually keep you from drowning.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And recognizing that the life jacket doesn't float, well, it forced the author to answer a pretty monumental question.
Which is,
what would love actually require if it were made ethically accountable?
Wow. And the answer to that question, it seems to be the engine for this entire Hyper-Sanity framework, because they draw this incredibly sharp line between private sympathy and public defense.
Yes.
There's a note where the author writes about the mother, quote, giving unconditional love, but never taking a stand for what's right.
And that realization, it forced a massive reprioritization.
Yeah.
I mean, the author realized that if private sympathy isn't enough to stop abuse, then you have to prioritize actions over claims.
Mm-hmm.
You have to prioritize consequences over intentions and accountability over apology.
Yeah,
It's a deeply, deeply pragmatic view of human connection.
it really is.
It essentially says, your feelings for me are real, but if they do not translate into action that protects me from harm, they just are not enough to sustain reality.
But understanding that the life jacket doesn't float is really only step one, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's just the baseline.
Right, because knowing that love alone couldn't protect them, the author had to figure out how to survive the active destruction of their mind.
Because the environment they were in wasn't just, neglectful.
No, it was a full-on campaign of severe gaslighting from their family. And, if you've ever dealt with a gaslighter in your own life, you know exactly how maddening this is, that terrifying feeling of the ground constantly shifting under your feet.
The environment we were looking at is one of systemic psychological destabilization. I mean, the family was repeatedly attacking the author's intelligence, their memory, their perception.
Even weaponizing their disability, right?
Yes, exactly, using it to attack their credibility.
Yeah.
Because gaslighting isn't just lying, it's an attack on your epistemology, like how you know what you know.
And the family wanted to force a very specific conclusion. They really wanted the author to believe, you cannot trust your own understanding of the world, so someone else must dictate reality for you.
Which is the textbook definition of how domination operates.
Hmm.
You don't just control someone physically. You control what they are allowed to know is true.
Right.
If you control the truth,
Yeah.
you control the person.
And the expected response to that kind of relentless attack on your sanity, what we, I think, often see in trauma survivors might be what the author calls compensatory certainty.
Right, the fortress mentality.
Yeah, you get pushed into a corner, so you build a fortress. You become rigidly dogmatic and decide, I am never wrong, everyone else is stupid, I have to dominate the interpretation of events, so I never feel crazy again.
It's a very common defense mechanism.
I
mean, you resolve the terrifying instability by just becoming an absolutist.
But the author goes the complete opposite direction. They chose something called epistemic humility.
Yeah.
They embraced quotes like, the more I learn, the more I understand how much I don't know. But I have to push back here because, honestly, this feels totally counterintuitive.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you are constantly being told you're crazy and that your memory is flawed, wouldn't leaning into uncertainty and saying, I know nothing, just make you infinitely more vulnerable to gaslighting? Like, wouldn't the abusers just use that humility against you?
It's a brilliant question, and it's really where the sheer mechanical genius of this framework shines.
Mm-hmm.
The author didn't surrender to doubt. They disciplined it.
Disciplined.
That is a massive distinction. When you are being gaslit, the abuser resolves their own insecurity by asserting unquestionable authority over reality. They say, I am right, you are wrong, end of story.
Right.
The author resolved their insecurity by making reality independently checkable.
Ah, so they didn't just wallow in the doubt. They put the doubt to work. It's the difference between saying, I don't know what's real, and saying, I might be wrong, so let's check the tape.
Exactly that. The pathway went from weaponized doubt to evidence checking, then to comparison, recursive analysis, external records, and, critically, correction when wrong.
Wow.
The author converted gaslighting-induced uncertainty into humility, but humility backed up by rigorous verification. And they applied this even to their own claims. They completely refused to reproduce the abuser's worldview of, being an unquestionable authority.
So what does this all mean in practice? Because this concept of making reality checkable, it didn't just stay in the author's head as some neat psychological trick for coping.
No, not at all.
It literally became the blueprint for the technology and the digital systems they built later in life.
The philosophical became the architectural.
Exactly. When you look at how they organize their life, there is an intense insistence on digital infrastructure. Like we're talking about databases, execution logs, canonical files.
Timestamps, exact speaker attribution.
Right. And a strict rule of no silent data loss. They explicitly describe this as anti-gaslighting architecture.
I love that term.
It's like they built a psychological black box flight recorder. You can argue all day long about why the plane crashed, but you cannot delete the audio of what was said in the cockpit.
That analogy perfectly captures the function, because the Hyper-Sanity OS is not separate from the philosophy. It is the technical embodiment of it.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the author's family history events being denied, meanings being completely twisted, private confirmations being publicly denied later. Abusers thrive in the absence of a record. They thrive in the void of memory.
Nothing happened. That's the classic gaslighter's refrain, right? If
Exactly.
it isn't written down, it never existed.
So the author built systems where errors must be explicitly acknowledged, systems where changes are recorded, claims can be traced, and previous versions actually survive.
It fundamentally neutralizes the abuser's favorite weapon.
It does. The underlying philosophy of this technology is incredibly potent. No authority should be able to silently overwrite reality.
No silent overwrites. Man, when someone hurts you, they don't get to just delete the log file and pretend it was a glitch.
Exactly.
That is powerful. And what's fascinating is that this strict adherence to objective reality wasn't just about self-preservation for the author. Because of their lived experience with physical disability, they began to see how this same erasure of reality was happening to others on a massive systemic level.
This is where the scope of the framework expands dramatically. It moves from personal defense to a universal ethic.
Yeah, because the author's disability placed them in situations where other people controlled the most fundamental, intimate aspects of their life. We're talking about food, housing, medicine,
The
transportation.
basics of survival.
Right. Imagine having to debate whether your physical pain is actually real with a doctor who holds the prescription pad or, an institution that controls your access to care.
It's terrifying.
And the author makes a really interesting point here. They note that disability didn't magically make them a better, more compassionate person. Rather, it made agency violation incredibly visible.
Right, because for someone with greater independence, an agency violation might just be an occasional conflict with, say, a terrible boss or a controlling partner.
Sure.
But for the author, control was totalizing. It governed their bodily safety 24/7. When someone controls your basic physical needs, you see the mechanics of domination at a granular level.
And this totalizing pain produced what they call a moral circle expansion.
Mm-hmm.
The author fundamentally identified with the harmed, not the aggressor. The framework expanded from just protecting themselves to including other disabled people, abused children, animals, people denied health care, the poor, immigrants, and even future victims of climate damage.
It's a huge circle.
It is. The central logic became systems should be judged by what they do to the least powerful. There's this incredible quote from the database from August 2024.
Oh, I know the one.
The author writes, "Perception can be either freedom or slavery." And the very next day, they wrote that if it takes intelligence to see your chains, it takes even more to help others see theirs. Helping others see their chains was always the core mission.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of trauma psychology, this is a radical departure from the norm.
Really? How so?
Well, a very common trauma response is identification with the aggressor. The subconscious logic basically goes, I was powerless and it was intolerable, so I must become powerful over someone else to ensure I am never victimized again.
Passing the pain along.
Exactly. But the author's conclusion was the exact inverse. Their logic was, I was powerless and it was intolerable, so power must be prevented from erasing another person.
But, understanding this conceptually is easy when you're the victim. The real crucible for this framework, the moment it actually gets tested, is when the power dynamic flips.
Yes.
It's one thing to have this philosophy when you are powerless. It's another thing entirely when you are the one holding the power.
The ultimate divergence point.
Yes. The test was how the author chose to exercise power when they finally had it, specifically when they became the caregiver for their vulnerable mother.
Right.
The very same mother who had failed to protect them in childhood.
This is where the ethical theory has to survive contact with messy, painful reality.
Yeah. And the author ended up physically assisting their mother, despite their own severe injuries, and even used AI to help improve her care.
Which is incredible on its own.
It really is.
Yeah.
And they use this experience to illustrate two distinct responses to someone else's helplessness. On one side, you have compensatory domination, which is making someone dependent on your will so you can feel powerful.
Right.
On the other side, you have what the author chose, protective capability, becoming useful enough to help someone survive and defend themselves. But I have to admit, I'm a little confused by a concept they introduce here called epistemic responsibility. Walk me through that.
Okay, sure.
Because if you are protecting someone who is vulnerable, shouldn't you be the one taking charge and deciding what's best for them?
It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But epistemic responsibility is the fear that if you are confidently wrong about a situation, you could actively harm the person you love. The author didn't want to just keep the mother alive. They wanted the mother to exercise her own agency. Even when using AI or providing physical help, the goal was to give her the tools to decide her path, not to decide it for her.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So the dominator needs you to accept their reality, but the protector just wants you to be able to see reality clearly enough to make your own choices.
That is the core distinction. The dominator requires compliance to feel safe. The protector requires the other person to have clarity.
Right.
And that difference completely explains the author's intense study of serial offenders, which, comes up a lot in the chat logs.
Yeah, I saw that and wondered why.
Well, the author wasn't studying violent offenders out of some morbid true crime curiosity. They were studying the divergence point. Both the author and the serial offenders share the exact same root: wound, childhood humiliation, and profoundly damaged agency. But they took radically different paths.
It all maps out so clearly when you look at the causal chain.
It's a remarkable progression. I mean, it starts with total powerlessness, met with that partial, imperfect love from the mother.
Right, the life jacket that doesn't float.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the love was partial, reality wasn't completely devoid of care. It created an identification with the mother's vulnerability, which led to a fear of betraying her or misleading her.
Wow.
That fear forced epistemic humility, the "I might be wrong, let's check" mindset,
Yeah.
which then forced rigorous self-education, the building of external memory, and those anti-gaslighting databases to check the evidence.
And ultimately, it culminated in the ethical non-transmission of domination.
Exactly.
They didn't attempt to eliminate their own powerlessness by making another person powerless. They attempted to eliminate it by making themselves and the people they cared for more capable of recognizing reality.
Which is arguably the highest form of caregiving, transforming your own desperate need for agency into competence in service of another person, rather than competence demonstrated through superiority.
When you step back and look at the whole picture, hypersanity isn't just some abstract philosophy. It is a highly structured cognitive architecture.
Absolutely.
It was built specifically to ensure that no one, not the family abusers, not the author's own justified anger, and not even their deep, complicated love for their mother, could ever become an unquestionable authority over objective reality.
However, this raises an important question, and the author includes a very necessary recursive warning about this exact framework.
Right.
The system has to be able to check itself.
Because even anti-domination tools have risks.
Enormous risks. The warning is that an anti-domination framework can accidentally become a brand new form of domination if you aren't incredibly careful.
How does that happen?
It happens the moment you start believing that you understand someone's motives better than they do.
Oh, they call that epistemic domination.
Yes. The trap is looking at a loved one and saying, I see the structural patterns of dominations so clearly. Therefore, I know exactly why you were doing what you were doing, and therefore your own perspective on your actions no longer matters.
I know the truth, you don't.
Exactly. To prevent that, the framework insists we must stick strictly to observable reality. We have to judge intent versus function. We have to rely on hard evidence versus our own psychological interpretation. We have to look at observed behavior rather than inferred motives.
It's keeping the X-ray machine calibrated. You can't just look at the murky waters of human behavior and confidently declare what's at the bottom based on your gut instinct, even if you think you're an expert.
Right.
You need the structured doubt. You need the evidence. Which leaves us with the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about your week. Think about your own life and the people you care deeply about. When you are fiercely trying to protect someone by making sure they see the truth of a situation, at what exact moment does offering your perspective cross the line into dictating their reality? Are you leaving room for the evidence, or are you just becoming the new doctor in the room, forcing your interpretation of the X-ray onto them?
It's tough.
How do you ensure your intense desire to protect someone doesn't accidentally become the very chains you're trying to help them break?
The question that demands exactly that epistemic humility we've been talking about.
Yeah,
It requires us to constantly check our own work.
it really does. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We appreciate you being here to unpack these complex, vital ideas with us. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.